Welcome to Labcast, a podcast about the medical laboratory science profession, brought to you by MedLab Convo. To get notified once we drop an episode, you can do well to subscribe to all our social media platforms at MedLab Convo. For questions, feedbacks, and shout-outs, you can do well to send a mail to at medlabconvolabcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.
La cram, la pour, la forget. This is something almost every student is familiar with. In fact, most medical laboratory science students read with just one goal in mind, passing the next exam. But somewhere between the lecture notes, past questions, and midnight cramming, there is a bigger question. Should we be reading to pass or reading to practice? Because in real life laboratories, there are no multiple choice options, no marks for partial answers. There are only real patients, real samples, and real consequences. So in this episode, we'll be looking at what medical lab science students often get wrong about studying. We'll be talking about skill development and how to get ready to transition into real life practice. With me on this episode is my co-host, Chinelo.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chinelo Mudaga. I'm a medical laboratory science professional. Most of you know me already. And for those who don't know me, well, today is a nice start. Nice to meet you.
And well, on this episode, we have a special guest, and this one will blow your mind.
Our special and very important guest for today is Professor Ngozi Esther Adejumo.
Professor Esther is an educator, she's a researcher and a mentor. She's the head of the Department of Medical Laboratory Science at Babcock University. Professor Esther champions deep conceptual learning, translational thinking, and competence-driven practice, guiding students to transform academic knowledge into practical skills that excel beyond examinations, impacting patient care and broader MLS professional practice. She is also a professor of chemical pathology and immunology. Please let's make welcome Professor Esther Adejumo. You're highly welcome, ma.
Thank you very much, Confidence and Nelo. I'm glad to be here.
All right, ma. Thank you so much for your time. So as a way of starting, okay, ma, I don't know, am I permitted to ask how many years you've been in the academics?
Okay, thank you very much. I've been in academics for 15 years now.
Wow, that's a long time coming. So my first question would be, in your experience over the course of practice, what would you say is the difference between reading to pass exams and reading to practice as a future medical laboratory scientist?
Thank you very much for the question. Maybe before I answer, I would like to lay a little background about what differentiates medical laboratory science from some other science-based courses or programs. In the current curriculum, as it has always been, medical laboratory science is categorized as an allied health science, while some other science programs are categorized as basic science. So a basic science program, all you basically need is just to maybe have the knowledge. But when we are talking about applied and then health science, it goes beyond just knowledge. We need to understand concepts, mechanisms, because at the end of everything, we'll also be dealing with patients, we'll be dealing with humans. So it's a very, very sensitive course that we are studying. So that's what I have for background. With that background in mind, it implies that, the topic is reading to pass and then reading to practice. Even though we're expected to read to pass because we need to pass, ultimately our focus, long-term goal should be to read to practice. What is the difference between the two? Somebody who is reading to pass is actually just memorizing. You are doing some kind of surface reading. Most times those reading actually focused on examination questions. In some cases, there's already an area of concentration provided by the teacher or previous past questions. So you just know where to focus on. You direct all your attention on that. You just do some surface reading. You can do a crash program, just cram. You go into the exam. You have a target. You want to maybe have an A grade. And after the exam, in most cases, you forget everything that you've studied. In fact, one of the things I've observed over time is what I call fragmentation in knowledge. So by the next semester, and I'm asking questions about the past semester, and there's no connection. But for somebody who is reading to pass, you're not just concerned about memorizing and recalling the subject or the topic. You're also trying to master the concepts. You want to understand the mechanisms. If there is a principle, you're not just memorizing what is this principle. You also want to understand the components. Why is there an enzyme in this principle? What is its function? Why is there a color produced at the end? So I'm using chemical pathology to give this example because that's my area of specialization. At the end of everything, such kind of students build competence. They're able to retain this knowledge beyond the exam because it was never their endpoint. And so they're able to carry it on into practice, into their career. So it's more long-term. And I think that that's all we need as medical laboratory science students. Thank you.
All right, Ma. Thank you for what you said. But one thing I've noticed, it always seems like our academic system has always seemed to reward memorization more than mastery. It's almost like every lecturer who comes to teach, is more concerned about you passing his course than about you actually learning what he has to teach. Because most times they come to class and they're not talking about how you apply this in the real world. They're talking about how if you don't read this, you fail, or if you don't listen to them, you fail. It's almost like they reward reading to pass exams more than reading to actually know. Because what do you have to say about that?
Thank you once again. Unfortunately, that is the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. It seems like our academic system is structured to reward, how did you put it now? Reading to pass, because there's going to be an assessment which actually rewards what you can recall. That's just the system on the ground, and that doesn't actually help or promote reading to practice. So I think that there's a need for a mindset shift in the teaching style as well as in the reading style. That is my thought. It will help the medical laboratory science profession.
So, Ma, I'm a little bit curious to know how it was during your time as a student. Was it as bad as we have it now?
And I'm like, when I was a student, well, I've heard some people share some other experiences, maybe dependent on where they trained. But when I was a student, I think that I was also under pressure to pass. That's just the truth. So I read to pass. However, I also had my own strategies. So I read beyond passing. I read to understand. In fact, I read as much as to be able to teach my peers. And that is one of the ways that we can enhance reading to practice. So I read to understand. By nature, I like to understand mechanisms. And that's actually why I went into chemical pathology, because I had to be able to relate biochemistry, physiology, anatomy, and the rest of them. So I think that's always been like that, that pressure to pass, to do well, to move to the next level, to create that impression, a positive image, maybe before your peers, before your parents, before institutions that actually reward high score, has always been there. However, it takes intentionality to reprogram a mindset to want to pass. When it comes to how teachers will teach us then, yes, they will come to the classroom, they'll speak to us, talk to us, we have our textbooks. Well, along the line, we always had the opportunity to go for medical laboratory posting, just like they have now. But I think that in our time, in my own time, we're paying more attention to those laboratory posting and practical practical exercises, we had less distraction. That's the thing. We had less distraction. I don't want to go into what these distractions are now, but I think we all agree that there are more distractions now for students than they were then. So those are part of the contributing factors.
All right, Ma. Thank you. Ma, so how do students reconcile the need to pass their exams and the need to also, okay, let me reframe this. There is a need for students to pass their exams, no doubt. But in real life, they also have to be attuned to this knowledge. They should be able to understand it in a way that they can apply it in real life. So how do they reconcile these two needs?
Okay, I'll try to be as maybe practical and relatable as possible. How do they merge these two needs? One, a student needs to grasp that knowledge, whether in the classroom or from a textbook, because at the end of everything, when you be assessed, you must be able to show that you have that knowledge. However, you also need to study deeper. For those who just want to pass, you just study superficially. In fact, a student can decide to do TDB overnight, and then you memorize everything. You just get into the exam hall and then you write and then you leave. But students need to be intentional about studying repeatedly, trying to integrate the knowledge acquired from theories and classroom into practice, into real life scenarios. For instance, when a student studies or reads, try to maybe imagine, try to think, and then when you go to the laboratory, trying to relate what you have been taught, what you have seen in the books with what you are seeing on the bench. I think that will help a lot. And what something that I think that also help is this hands-on, repeated hands-on practice, whether in the school laboratory for schools or universities that have such kind of arrangement, or even during the clinical laboratory posting. Students should engage more in hands-on to build experience. Well, I have this philosophy. We talk about the head, the heart, and the hands. So what you have in your head and then it's in your mind, you begin to put it to practice. You can't forget it as easily and readily as you forget something that is just in one aspect, just the head. So it's important for us to also give more attention as students to hands-on practice. You should take our practical aspects very, very serious. And I also think that if students cultivate this habit of teaching one another, it will also help to translate that knowledge into practice, because the more you teach, it's like repeating. The more you teach, even teaching yourself, how this knowledge I've gotten, how does it apply in a real life scenario? How does it apply in real medical laboratory science practice? When I go to the lab, I was taught this topic. How does it apply? Is as basic as, for instance, I remember one of those classes that I teach as an introductory class for 300 level students, because that's when they start going to the lab. One of the first assignments I'll give a student will be, when you get to the lab for your first posting, when you're coming back, come to the next class with the request forms and the report sheet from the laboratory. Because I want them to see all the requests that are made in the laboratory. I want them to see that there are procedures. I want them to see them, they generate results. So when we tell you these theories, this is where it is translated in the laboratory. That begins to build their curiosity, it begins to build interest, in the course or in the topic, beyond the theoretical aspect, beyond the classroom delivery.
All right, Prof. I'm very much interested in an answer you gave earlier. You said you put some strategies in place to help you study and know beyond what was being taught in class. And then you also mentioned that there were less distractions then. Yeah, I can totally agree with the fact that there were less distractions then than now. So in a situation such as now, situations like when we had the COVID-19 issue, when we all went back to school, a whole lot of semesters were rushed to cover up for lost time. So in situations where there are short semesters, in situations where there are so many distractions, what do you think students can actually put in place to enhance their study life, to help them read beyond just passing for exams? Because then everybody was in a hurry. They just wanted to pass. everybody's mind was just set on passing the exam and moving to the next semester. I'm talking about the COVID-19 time now. So in such a situation as that, how do you think someone can help him or herself to not just focus on passing, but also to be able to apply what he or she's learning in the real world? And if you could actually share some of the strategies that you said you put in place that helped you go beyond just reading to pass, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so well, one of the things that I know that actually leads to reading to pass is short period of time. When the time for study is short, so automatically, or naturally, the brain just reprograms itself. It wants to prioritize immediate goals. It wants to prioritize immediate reward. It's just nature, and you just want to. There's a goal, there's a target. I want to get a good grade, and you want to read as much as possible, because in most times you might not necessarily have an area of concentration. You are still going to be examined over everything, so you want to cover as much as possible within a short period. So one is just focused on surface reading, just to get a good grade. And now, how will one the program itself to achieve reading for practice in that situation? I think that despite the tight schedule, limited time, one still has to be intentional. Part of things that will help will be reflective reading. Maybe after reading, just find a time to reflect over what was read. One of the things I know I used to do as a student, after reading, when I lie down, at least I try to go through what I've read in my brain until I fall asleep. I also had times when I had to walk to my school, a bit of a distance. One of the things I did during that time was I tried also to revise in my head what I've read, how does it apply. I tried to do that a lot. And then I had maybe a reading schedule. So within so time to so time, or so day to so day, I should be able to read this and read that. And then I tried to connect whatever I was reading with what I had read before. So I didn't fragment my studies. If I'd read something in hematology and it had to do with, for instance, hemoglobin, and I was reading something in clinical chemistry that had to do with hemoglobin, I would try to relate both of them together. If I was reading something that had to do with diabetes, and I'm reading something in medical microbiology, and then they mention something about diabetes, I try to connect them together. So I try to integrate my studies to see how they relate with one another. In that way, I get a full grasp and an understanding of what medical laboratory science is. Many times I try to relate the pathophysiology with what I've learned in biochemistry and physiology. My mindset was one of continuity, just continuous learning. So I just knew that I couldn't fragment my studies. So I'm done with this part and then I move to the next. Then in my time too, we were not necessarily running a strict semester program. I just knew that we had to keep studying this thing. In fact, we were more focused on the professional exams, kind of. And so you knew that you had to keep studying until you passed the first professional exam, and keep studying until you passed the second professional exam. We knew already that they could ask you questions from 200 level, 300 level in your 400 level first professional exam. So we kept that in our consciousness and we're carrying it along. But I think that the scenario is a little different now. It's a little different now. There's this fragmentation. So people just expect that once I'm done and I'm examined, I've dropped that, I'm moving to the next. So I think that doesn't help. And like I said before, I did a lot of peer group discussion, peer group study, and teaching. I'll teach myself, self-examine myself. I'll also do discussion with my peers, and then we'll examine each other, ask questions, real practical questions. We'll do case studies, try to recall what we did in the lab, and we even try to do some practical exercises on our own. We had this group, so that really helped a lot.
So thank you for your answer. But oftentimes I've experienced that a student can graduate with excellent grades and still struggle on the bench. So what are some of the common mistakes you've observed with fresh graduates that should have been addressed in the university?
Okay, thank you very much. So most students that will graduate with excellent grade and still struggle on the bench are like that because they sincerely paid more attention to the theoretical aspect. They were sincerely reading more for grades than for practice. Most of such students, they didn't read deep enough. They read more on the surface. Most times they just didn't spend time on the studies. They just knew that there was this, let's call it shortcut or easy way to just memorize some parts of the what is being taught or what is expected, and then they will pass. And so that's one of the challenges I've seen. So there wasn't this connection. There's a disconnection between theory and practice. And so when they get to the bench, it becomes an issue. So that's part of the challenges that we see in fresh graduates. So there's no connection between the theory and the practice. And in some cases too, it might even be a case of lack of exposure to hands-on and practice. And some students, or maybe the institution, did not have sufficient provision for the practical aspect. Some did not have sufficient provision for laboratory posting. Some did not have sufficient mentorship or supervision. They didn't have people who could teach and integrate this practical aspect to the theoretical basis. Some may have to do with the teaching style, the teaching material. When a student is just given theoretical backgrounds, maybe principles, procedures, and all that, and there's no opportunity to also relate this with real life scenarios, case studies, scenarios. Even during assessments, such kind of students end up graduating with just this theoretical strength. But in scenarios where students have been exposed to case studies, even if at all they had not seen those kind of situations, they already have a preview of such kind of scenarios. So they know that there's this condition that is known as whatever name, and these are the kind of findings that one expects in that kind of situation. In the laboratory, as a medical laboratory scientist, this is what you're expected to do. If students are from the onset taught that when you begin to practice beyond all these theories, you're expected to practice quality management system. You're expected to pay attention to details, to give accurate results, because you are dealing with life, we are dealing with patients. I think that it will help. So part of the challenges that I've seen among fresh graduates is this gap between theory and practice. Sometimes they come in and they are just like kind of lost at the beginning. It takes a little while to begin to accommodate and accustom to the new situation, new real life scenario. However, I've seen that many of our graduates are also very willing to learn. The internship period is a very nice and welcome transition phase. It has helped a lot of our graduates to actually transition properly into practice, and to learn a lot. That's what I've observed.
All right, thank you very much, Ma. So on the part of the medical laboratory science governing bodies, what policies would you say can be put in place to ensure that students are actually given the opportunities to learn? Students are actually given the opportunities to not just learn for the purpose of passing, but also to be able to apply these things in the real world. What policies would you say can actually be put in place on the part of these governing bodies to help this and reduce the rate at which students just read to pass?
Okay, thank you very much. Because you already said not just clinical laboratory posting, because that's the major way that can be regulated. If the governing body, Medical Laboratory Science Council of Nigeria, ensures that our students are scheduled for sufficient laboratory posting, that will help a lot, because that's one of the best place where they actually meet real life scenarios, at least as students. So that's one. In addition to that, I think that they can also put in policies that has to do with the teaching style. If teaching styles are, like you said at the beginning, you said teachers will kind of subtly threaten you, you must pass a subject. If you don't write like this, you will not get this score and all that. So the student is already tailored from onset to read in a particular style, to maybe memorize the teacher's notes and come and write it down exactly. So if there are policies that will make teachers include real life scenarios, case studies, experiences in their teaching style, I think that that will really, really help a lot on the teaching methodology style. For an institution, I know that before a program is accredited, there are standards that they must meet. And the governing body, which is Medical Laboratory Science Council of Nigeria, is very particular to ensure that the standards are such that will reflect the applied aspect of medical laboratory science. So an institution will not be accredited if they don't have a laboratory, or laboratories, standard laboratories, quality laboratories that meet specification for the number of students that are available. Because it's one thing for students to go for posting, that's the hospital based, even that they will even accredit and assess the hospital. Is another thing for the students to have practical hands-on experience in the school, university or department itself. And it's another thing for the space and staff on ground to be sufficient to be able to interact with these students appropriately. When you have maybe one staff attending to 50 students in the laboratory, such students cannot get sufficient interaction as much as when you have one laboratory staff attending to maybe 10 or 20 students. So these are some of the policies that I know that council has put on ground. However, whether it is being enforced or being practiced in various institutions, that one is a different ballgame. Then when it comes to the students, what policy can the council put on ground? I need to think about that. How will the council influence students? I know that our exams, and I appreciate the professional exam for that, beyond the university exams, which many times are theoretical and theory-based, professional exams, if as it were now, you just do a little bit of theory, it's majorly practical based. And once you don't pass that practical, you have automatically failed. So they want to test your practice. They want to test your ability to manage time, solve problems that will arise as you are carrying out the test. How do you interpret? Because most of the questions are meant to be practical oriented. So how will you interpret a result that you have generated? So I think that maybe there should be some more enforcement so that even the questions that are used for assessing students, the teaching methodology is tailored more towards practice, real life practice, than just the theoretical aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma. Personally, I also think that the government has a very huge role to play, especially in the aspect of providing more infrastructure, because one of the challenges that impede students learning in a university is having a poor learning environment, especially for developing their practical skills. Sometimes the teaching hospitals where we go for our postings are barely enough to hold the number of students that are being assigned there. So at the end of the day, it's almost like a survival of the fittest. So a student might genuinely want to learn, but due to the poor infrastructure provisions, they would not be able to grasp anything. And then in some situations, some students do not even have access to quality laboratories that they can practice with while in school. So recently during my internship, we were given something to identify on the microscope, and one of my colleagues was not able to do it. And when she was asked, she said, "Oh, in my school we did not have a medical microbiology lab." She said it was under renovation at the time I was there, or something in that line. So now it's a problem for that student because she has to go the extra mile to be able to grasp something that would have been easier if she had that foundation. So I think the government has a really huge role to play in improving our hospital infrastructures.
I agree with you 100% that the government has a role. The thing is that sometimes the government has to be put under some kind of, is it pressure or demands, and that's why what the council tries to do when it comes to accreditation. And so accreditation is a system that put demands on the institution, make these things available. And so maybe I don't want to go into some other deviations. Ideally, an institution should put a structure that is acceptable by the governing body in place before the program is accredited, and that accreditation is done within a space of 5 years. So there's a continuation. I mean, there's room for continuity.
All right, thank you, Ma. So, in a situation where a student does not have access to a good laboratory for practice, or maybe due to the overpopulation in school, this student is not able to learn practical skills, is there anything that you would advise this student to do from your own experience?
Okay, thank you very much. So what I would say is that learning is lifelong. As long as that student has that desire and aptitude to learn, it's never too late, because that person didn't have that opportunity before. So when the person gets the opportunity, maybe through internship, that person has to be intentional, with putting in the best. I know that in some cases there might be room for not being there at all times, but when you already have a deficit, you have to go the extra mile to be available at all times, to learn, to ask questions from superiors and supervisors, to practice continuously, because like they say, practice makes perfect. Such a student or now an intern must be intentional about asking questions, about documentation, journaling experiences, journaling whatever challenges that such a person encounters. And then I'll also advise that person should just not be shy, not be ashamed, be confident, just see it as a learning opportunity. Whatever opportunity that you get, as a learning opportunity to make up for previous deficits. As long as we are willing to learn, there's always room for improvement. When I graduated as a student, I wouldn't say I know much. I wouldn't say I know much, but I was willing to learn. And I had people around me that were willing to teach me, because they saw I was humble, I was sincere. Where I made mistakes, I accepted the mistakes, I was ready to be corrected. So they were there, they gave me such an enabling environment, and I was able to try very, very well. Within a short time, I could do very well, very, very well. They could trust me with the laboratory work, they could trust me with my results. And that was because I accepted my state and I was willing to improve, I was willing to grow. And so there's also place for mentorship. Look for somebody that you can work with, that you can, if it means coming for call duties, if it means coming for extra teaching periods, just do all that one can, because one cannot bargain for competence when it comes to your reputation as a professional. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that, Ma. Just one last question. Aside these practical skills, for any student or any person who would be listening to this today, are there any other skills you feel, as one who has been in the field for a really long time, are there any other skills you believe that we should have as a medical laboratory professional that is very important for us to have as medical laboratory professionals?
Okay, yes, there are skills we need to have. We should also remember that medical laboratory science is not only hospital-based. We are very versatile. We work in industries. We innovate. We create diagnostic tools. We're even involved in entrepreneurship. So we do some buy and sell. We formulate reagents. We constitute vaccines. We're involved in leadership, management, supply chain, and so many others. So we need to develop skills that will help us in all these areas that I've mentioned. And to be able to function in some of them, we need to develop problem-solving skills, because even in the lab, problems will arise. You should be able to think critically, independently, logically, be able to evaluate the situation and provide solutions. We should be able to make decisions that will help the patient independently, because sometimes you are just there on your own. For instance, when someone is on call duty, so there's a need for critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, entrepreneurship skills, because it's a profession and a career that one has chosen. You want to make a living out of it. So there's some entrepreneurial skills that a student should begin to develop. We should think innovatively. As we study theoretically, we get to hear all those principles, diseases, especially as young people, and then in the digital era, we should begin to think of how we can create devices. I strongly support collaborations, and I do that even with my students here. Are there, use your maybe relationships well or professionally, you can collaborate or interact with students who are in computer science. So that talks about maybe team spirit. It's also a skill, you should be able to work with a team, you should be able to collaborate and begin to think of how you can develop tools that will be useful to solve some of those problems that you are identifying in the classroom and that you identify as you study. We should also develop skills that we need for research. Where diagnostic, we talk about disease, we want to prevent some of them. And so we should be able to carry out some research and start from our days as students. That's why at least part of the criteria we need to graduate is to do a project. But sometimes because our mindset is also tailored at passing the project, so we just want to do the project within a short time. We don't even understand this. We just buy the reagents, put through and to put the book together, and then we submit. But if we are thinking beyond passing, even at that point, we put in more effort to understand and see little things that we may not have seen if we're not paying detailed attention. And with that, we might be able to solve problems that, let me use the word, bigger people are not able to solve. So those are part of the skills that we need as medical laboratory scientists or science students. Also need communication skills. We should be able to interact with others in the laboratory, and it starts from when we are students. We should be able to interact with our colleagues in the medical field amicably as a team. We need all these conflict resolution skills. We shouldn't be people that are just bent on fighting and tearing down one another. We should work collaboratively for the good of the patient, for the good of the health system. So those are some of the skills that I think that we need. There are a lot of them actually, but maybe just a few that I've mentioned. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Prof, we've talked a lot. We've talked a lot on, your academic side. So during the course of your answer, I was wondering whether it was easy for you to transition from being a student to interning and probably working a couple of years in the laboratory. I don't know if there was that. Was there any tension in the transitioning?
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe I should put this background. I didn't intern. I schooled when after graduation you go for NYSC. So maybe that makes it maybe more complicated. So you realize that when I was talking, I said the internship phase is a very welcomed one. It helps bridge the gap between this school theoretical aspect and then real life practice. So I really appreciate it. So maybe that's why I really appreciate it. So from school I went for NYSC, and when I went in as a corper, I must tell you that the gap was obvious. It was very, very obvious. I don't want to go into details, but it was obvious. And some of the things I shared were things that actually helped me. I realized that the things that learned, we had a good facility where we did practicals. We also went for laboratory postings. However, when we went for those practicals were still tailored towards what we know they will ask us in the exam. So they were preparing us maybe for professional exam. When we went for laboratory postings, we had restrictions. The student, don't touch this, don't touch that. Look at, just pay some attention. We'll show you some aspects. So there were some real life hands-on practice that I never had until I went for NYSC, and it was glaring. However, I was very, very sincere and humble. I just wanted them to take me the way I am, and I was very eager and willing to learn. I accepted every challenge, every responsibility. Where I made errors, I made it known. I was just ready to learn. I wasn't lazy at all. And I must confess that I did so well. I did my NYC at Ahmadu Bello University Teaching Hospital Zaria, Chemical Pathology Laboratories. So I learned so fast and did so well that I was retained after NYSC. So I started work the day after I finished NYSC. I learned on the job, and I learned very well. And I stayed there for almost 6 years. So I practiced on bench as a medical laboratory scientist. However, from onset, even when I was in school, I already knew that I wanted to go for postgraduate studies. I wanted to be in academics. I transitioned gradually because even when I left the teaching hospital, I still joined a university board as then they would call us medical laboratory technologists. But I didn't mind. I was transitioning gradually. I couldn't get it straight. So I did that for 2 years before I finally entered into academics. So I needed to have my master's degree before I joined academics. So I went through all this transition, and I was learning sincerely, humbly, openly on the job, and I kept getting better and growing. And I'm still learning because it's a profession where we have provision for continuous professional development. So I am still learning. We should all be versatile to learn. With that, the side is the beginning, not the limit. It's the beginning for all of us. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. It was really insightful listening to you. And with that, we're coming to the end of this episode. Where we've talked about a lot of things. We've been able to identify some of the mistakes that medical lab science students make, and some of these mistakes are fear-based learning, memorization without understanding, and the famous cram and pour culture. Also, we have prioritizing performance over competence, and the inability to merge theory with real world application. So these are some of the problems we've identified in this episode. And some of the solutions that Prof has given is that instead of focusing on can this come out in exam, maybe we should try and think towards how does this affect my future patients, or how does this affect my future practice as a medical laboratory scientist, bearing in mind that our work is not only hospital based. And also we can also move past trying to compete with classmates and other people to trying to actually improve ourselves and our knowledge base. And of course, we learn by making mistakes. So if you're a student listening to these episodes, please do not be afraid to make any mistakes. In fact, your days as your studentship days are the best opportunity for you to fail and learn while at it. And also, we talked about some practical skills that we can develop during studying. Things like repetition, asking intentional questions during lab posting, and learning how to connect abnormal values to pathophysiology of disease and all. Basically, learning how your classroom knowledge can translate into real life scenarios. So this episode has really been insightful. It has been eye-opening, and hearing from a professional who has been at it for 15 years, I'm sure you were able to pick 18, 2, or even more that would help you in your academics. So please share this episode with your friends who would also appreciate the knowledge that has been shared so far. If you have a question for us, feel free to reach us at medlabconvolabcast@gmail.com. Please follow us on all social media platforms. It's MedLab Convo if you're not following us yet. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye.